Hello and welcome to the Oddschecker betting show sponsored by Unibet. I'm your host, George Elek, and later on in the show, I'll be joined by Johnny Ward as we look back to the Cheltenham Festival 2023. But before we do that, I caught up yesterday with the head of racing at Unibet, Ed Nicholson, to find out how the week was for them. They've also got a sign-up offer for new customers. Deposit £10 and get money back up to £40 if your racing bet loses, your first racing bet that is, and a £10 casino bonus as well. T's and C's do apply. You can find the link in the description below to sign up for an account, and this is what Ed made of the week at Prestbury Park. Joined by Unibet's head of racing, Ed Nicholson, as we look back at the week that was. How did the festival go from a perspective of the bookmaker?
Well, it ended up well, but to begin with, it wasn't looking too good. The Tuesday and the Wednesday were dreadful in terms of betting and the punters winning. But it all turned around on the Thursday. Thursday was going to be a big day with all the favourites, Mighty Potter, Lucia, just two of four that were going to be well backed. And obviously with all them losing, it ended up being a very good Thursday. And the Friday, despite a well-backed Gold Cup favourite and a well-backed Triumph favourite, it ended the week well for us. So overall, not too bad. The great thing about Cheltenham, though, it gives us an opportunity to communicate to existing customers, to lapsed customers, to those that maybe only bet a few times a year. And we saw an increase in the actives and the turnover. So overall, from a business point of view, it was pretty good. And I would say it was all topped with the marvellous success of Constitution Hill winning the Unibet Champion Hurdle. Obviously, Constitution Hill ridden by a Unibet ambassador in Nico de Boinville and trained by Unibet ambassador in Nicky Henderson. So there's plenty of Unibet around on the Tuesday afternoon.
I was going to ask you that, with Constitution Hill clearly being, well, in my mind at least, the star of the week and the star of national hunt racing in general at the moment, with an obvious mention for the Gold Cup winner. What's it like when you've got a horse, as you say, trained by an ambassador, ridden by an ambassador in the race sponsored by Unibet that I guess you probably had for a few quid as well? Yeah,
I mean, we started laying Constitution Hill after he won the Unibet Tolworth the year before. We laid him at 33-1. One lucky customer got that. I must say, it's just one. But then, after that, everyone knew he was good. So I think after that race, he was only 10-1, 6-1, 5-1. So we didn't really lay that much on him, to be fair, because he was always quite short. It come the day as well. People had him in trebles and accumulators and what have you, but no one's really going to be backing him very big at 4-11, 1-3. So it was all about, for us, to maximise the opportunity of knowing that one of the best horses we've ever seen is now rated 175 by the BHA, was a horse that we knew very well. So before the event, we did a lot of our marketing material around Constitution Hill. We got these badges made. We gave them up at Cheltenham. They went down a treat. We had videos that took place on the day. We're in the middle of doing a series of Road to Cheltenham 2024, which started with him getting on the van, as it were, the horse box from Nicky Henderson's yard on that Tuesday, and it's going to go all the way through until next year on that Tuesday, or maybe, we never know, maybe Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. We don't know where it's going to run, but that we're going to have a nice Road to Cheltenham content piece to maximise our sponsorship. So, yeah, and also from a personal point of view, I mean, I've been down to Nicky's for years, and it's just unbelievable to be up close with such a wonderful horse. We actually interviewed Constitution Hill in his stables, in his box, while he was eating. And we didn't interview him, I hasten to add. He's very good, but the one thing he can't do is speak at the moment. But we did interview Nicky and the various people that look after Constitution Hill in his box while he was eating. And I've never, ever done anything like that, not been allowed to do anything like that, but he's so laid back. It was just incredible. So, yeah, we were emotionally attached, I suppose. Well, I certainly was. And as a business, it worked really well for us.
On the topic of Constitution Hill, have you had any indication from Nicky as to what the plan is going to be short term? Of course, we've got the opportunity to run an entry to go over to Ireland. And then the big question is, what's going to happen long term with Michael Buckley, the owner, being pretty bullish in his ideas of what this horse might be capable of over larger obstacles.
Yeah, we haven't, obviously, we wouldn't be told as Unibet. That would be told by Nicky Henderson first to the public. But we have discussed it at length on blogs. You can get the blogs at Unibet, as you know, and nothing's off the table. I mean, we've priced him up accordingly at Unibet because no one knows. I mean, they're going to have a chat. I was told they're going to have a chat in the summer to work out where they go. But there's such a public conversation about this public horse, about where he will run next year. I think he's going to run at Aintree. I think that's, as long as he's okay, I think he'll be running over 2.5 miles at Aintree. I think Nicky's indicated that. But next year, everything's up for grabs. I mean, we've priced him up in absolutely everything, as all bookmakers have. We're actually the top price for him to win the Unibet Champion Hurdle again, 5-6. But we've also priced him up to win the Arkle, 7-2. He's 10-1 to win the Champion Chase, 20-1 to win the Gold Cup. And this morning, our odds compilers even put him in to win the Ascot Gold Cup at 16-1. So, there's nothing this horse isn't being talked about being entered for. So it's quite difficult. I mean, myself, I would just keep your powder dry until we know exactly where the horse is going. And even then, things change. I remember Bouvet-Dare and Altior from Nicky Henderson's stable. Bouvet-Dare was going chasing. In fact, he did go chasing. He's unbeaten over fences. But he then reverted back to the hurdle. So there's still a long, long way to go. And I know people like to get fancy prices on anti-post, and I'm certainly one of those. Sometimes it's just best to keep your powder dry. And I would suggest that at the moment. If you think he's going to run in the Unibet Champion Hurdle, I mean, that 5-6 would be a gift, wouldn't it? But we don't know.
What would you do? I mean, in my mind, I'm a huge Constitution Hill fan, and I love the idea of going to the Champion Chase as a novice chaser, winning that, and then looking to step up in trip. But it feels like it's unlikely with the Arkle, probably the most likely option if they do go chasing. But what with your fan hat on, Nicky so well, what would you want to do?
Well, I mean, I suppose because I sponsor the Unibet Champion Hurdle, I'd love him to keep going on the Unibet Champion Hurdle. He'd win, and we'd get more publicity, and we'd get media value, and it would help me get sponsorship money. But I think they'll and ah, and I think they probably end up going for the Unibet Champion Hurdle. I mean, he's only 6, isn't he? So if they just have one more year, they can establish him as a great. Many people call him a great already, but he's only won 1 Unibet Champion Hurdle. If he wins 2, he brings himself in line with a lot of very good horses. I suppose then it's a case of, well, why not go for 3 after 2? But he can still run again in the Unibet Champion Hurdle. Nicky's modus operandi is normally to keep novices in novice events. So he very rarely runs a horse out of novice company when he can run them in novice company. So people talking about the Champion Chase and the Gold Cup, that's something that Nicky doesn't normally do. Michael Buckley, though, has spoken about it, and Michael's the owner. And of all the owners that Nicky has, Michael and him go back a long way, and I know that they often have these sort of discussions which are a bit left field. So, I mean, that could happen. But I suppose the obvious route would be to go to the Arkle Chase if you're going to go chasing, and he's 7-2 for that with Unibet. But it's a very tricky one. I know plenty of horses that have gone straight from hurdling to all age races, and some have done well, some unfortunately haven't done so well, and some have paid the ultimate cost. So I mean, I personally, if he was mine, I would keep him to hurdling for 1 more year and then have another discussion next year and run him in the Unibet Champion Hurdle.
Before we move away from Nicky's runners over the week, a quick mention of John Bon as well, who it feels like John Bon's bumped into 2 of the most exciting horses we've seen in recent history, with Constitution Hill in last year's Supreme Novice, and then El Fabiolo in this year's Arkle. Without those 2 runs, it's a well, if you take out those 2 horses, it's an unblemished record so far for John Bon. What do you think the future? Again, are we going to see John Bon turn up at Aintree?
I think John Bum will definitely turn up at Aintree, again over 2.5. Once again, Nicky in his blogs to us at Unibet has always said that he holds the horses in the highest regard, but also he thinks he's going to be a stayer. He's actually said that he thinks he's a Gold Cup horse. I think once we look back in his career, we'll think, how did he possibly finish second in a Supreme and an Arkle? I think he'll be a stayer. I really do. I actually spoke to Aidan Coleman about it at an event, and Aidan said, look, at the moment, he's definitely a 2-miler. He's got the speed for 2 miles. Why would you go anywhere else? That was before Cheltenham. But he said, I know what you mean. He could move into a staying horse. It's interesting. I looked at the records of horses that are ran in the Arkle and then run in the Gold Cup the very next year. Because I think that might be the way he goes. I think 2.5 at Aintree. If he wins that, King George. If he goes for the King George and runs well, you're not going to come back in distance. So then it's either Gold Cup or Ryanair. JP doesn't like the Ryanair in terms of if you look at the horses that he runs in the race, very few JP horses run in the Ryanair. They normally run to go back to champion, or they run in the Gold Cup. So then the Gold Cup becomes an option. Obviously, there's a long way to go, and you're making lots of suppositions and assumptions there. But I looked back just to see where the horses do go from the Arkle to the Gold Cup. And since 1999, 6 have tried. 1 year Arkle, next year Gold Cup. 3 have won, and the other one came second. So
wow.
So there are 2 horses that didn't do anything, but 4 have either won or come second, having run in the Arkle the year before and then turning up for the Gold Cup. So it's going to be interesting to see which way he goes. But I wouldn't put it out the possible. I mean, he's 40 to 1 with Unibet to win the Gold Cup. Our Ross compilers think I'm talking nonsense, but I wouldn't be surprised if he wins at Aintree, they start thinking about the King George, and if they think about the King George, then you have to think about the Gold Cup. But again, there's lots of days of racing to go ahead before anything happens there. But I think he's a very good horse. I think he'd be better over further. Incidentally, I looked at his rating. He actually ran below form at according to the BHA, albeit just by £1. But he didn't like him. A lot of horses improve running at Cheltenham because they're running against better horses, so their rating goes up. But he actually was deemed to have written to run below. And El Fabiola, the other reason why I don't think they'll keep him at 2 miles is El Fabiola looks an above average winner of the Arkle. So you don't think he's going to beat him. Constitution Hill goes chasing, you possibly couldn't beat him again. So I think a step up in trip might be what they do.
Away from Nicky's runners, what horses going into the week were the ones that you guys really needed beat?
Well, the favourite in the first in the Supreme was an interesting one because obviously disappointed at Leopardstown, but before that had been back to all anti-post for the Supreme. So that was good from a betting point of view, from a book point of view. But then it was all about the Thursday, really. I mean, the Thursday, it was a big day for us. Mighty Potter 10 to 11 was a very big loser. Lucia 13 to 8, 6 to 4. Shiskin obviously odds on. I thought he might be a bit shorter, but Shiskin was a very big loser for us. And earlier on in the week, Jerry Colombe had been beaten on the Tuesday. That was a good result. So lots of odds on favourites got beat. A lot of short price horses got beat. So we welcomed those. But 10 of the 28 races were won by horses at 3 to 1 or less. So it did do well as well. It's a very interesting festival because there were plenty of well-backed horses that lost. A lot of outsiders running well, winning 66 to 1 winners, 20 to 1 winners, 25 to 1 winners, which tends to happen at Cheltenham. But then there were plenty of the odds-on shots that lost as well. And Willie Mullins, we were pricing up how many winners Willie would get. He was on 88 career Cheltenham Festival winners before the start, and many people were thinking he'd actually do the whole shebang and win up to 100 before the festival ended. But in the end, he only had 6 winners. I mean, he had the good ones. He had the Gold Cup, he had the Champion Chase, didn't he? And he had plenty of other good ones. But he had 76 runners and 6 winners. And that's quite a nice little system if you want to have that for the future. Just like Willie Mullins' horse at Cheltenham, because I think the biggest price win 5 to 2. So when he does win, they don't tend to be a big price anyway.
No, indeed. And looking at Aintree now coming up, what are we seeing in terms of the action from the punters, especially with the Grand National? We've, of course, got Kirk Rambler, the hero from the Ultima, winning that 2 years in a row. Noble Yates up at the top end of the market, last year's winner. What are the punters doing? Well,
those 2 horses, they are at the top end of the market, and it's interesting because they both ran cracking races, but for different reasons at Cheltenham. I mean, I'm an old hand at Cheltenham racing, then going into Aintree, and I mean, Noble Yates ran a classic Grand National trial, didn't he, in the Gold Cup? Completely outpaced at the top of the hill. Interesting. He actually had a position, and then he lost his position. I spoke to Sean Bowen at Chepstow recently, and he said he just lost his position, was one pace, and then just ran on. It didn't help, he said, that at the top of the hill he went outside Rachel Blackmore, who was pulling up. So he lost a bit of ground there. But I was amazed that he finished fourth, 15 lengths, just 15 lengths behind the winner, Galloping Deschamps, which incidentally was another big loser. We laid an £80,000 bet at 6-4 on Galloping Deschamps. And wasn't he impressive? I mean, I watched him make mistakes nearly every fence in the first circuit, and he still came there on the bridle. What an impressive Gold Cup winner that was. Probably one of the best Gold Cups we've seen for a long time. But yeah, going back to Noble Yates, the thing about Noble Yates is he's done it. He's done it at Aintree, but he's done it from a much lower rating. He did it from a rating of 147. He has to race from 166. He's at the moment carrying 11 stone 11. So when he carried 10 stones 10 last year, so he's going to have to do it the hard way. He won so easily last year. He was obviously well handicapped, and he's run well in a kind of a trial, albeit the Gold Cup. So he'd have to go well. The one that the punters and the odds compilers took notice of, though, is Korak Rambler, as you said. I mean, he looks thrown in. I think he's now rated the BHA 156, and he's going to run the Grand National in 146. So, and there've been plenty of horses over the years that have done this, because obviously it's an early closing race, the Grand National. I remember Garrison Savannah being thrown in, having won the Gold Cup and then finishing second to Seagram in 91, I think it was. And there've been plenty of horses that have done similar, having won the Gold Cup and showed improved form. So, you know, on paper, he looks thrown in. He's 7-1 favourite. Noble Yates is 8-1 with Unibet. But Korak Rambler has won at Aintree. Don't forget, he's won over 3 miles novice handicap. So you know, different track, but he has won at that time of the year at Aintree. So yeah, still a long way to go. 7-1, and both those two horses are going to have their support to come the day. But it's interesting. We've priced up the Grand National. We've priced up a few of the races at Aintree already. In fact, our odds compilers have done a great job for Cheltenham next year. We're already priced up 24 of the 28 races for 2024. I think we're the best for that. So if you do want to have a little dabble, you should go to Unibet for the anti-posts.
All right, I'm going to go and check out those markets right now. Thank you very much to Head of Racing at Unibet, our sponsors on the Odds Checker betting show, Ed Nicholson, for taking the time to chat to us. Really interesting stuff, and getting the juices flowing ahead of Aintree as well.
Pleasure.
Yeah, really interesting stuff there from Ed. And Johnny, before we get into probably a Constitution Hill chat, how was your week? I'm hoping it was more profitable than mine.
Yeah, not too bad, to be honest. I didn't go heavy, to be honest, George. I thought it was a tough festival. I guess, like I'd say, the majority of the punters that I spoke to probably lost money on the festival, and it seemed to get more difficult as the day went on, or as the week went on. But I think, like, in terms of the actual racing itself, it was phenomenal. I thought it was like one of the best 4-day festivals that we've had. I thought day one was amazing with Constitution Hill winning and all the emotion of Honeysuckle. And I thought that there never seemed a race that actually like felt out of place. And I think in Constitution Hill, we saw one of the greatest performances we've ever seen in jumps racing. Where he goes next is going to be up for debate. But I thought it was a phenomenal festival. I didn't get heavily involved. My biggest bet was on Jerry Colombe, so that was quite tough. So I was probably slightly down, but enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my biggest positions was Corbett's Cross, each way with all the places, and that is after having had my biggest position being Goshen a couple of years before. So that last hurdle on the Friday can do one. I think is even, you know, we'll never know what would have happened.
Good that you're over it anyway.
Yeah, I'm over it. You know, you can't even tell that. It's absolutely fine now. I also managed to, on the Thursday, where not a single favourite won. A lot of the recreational punters I know did their money because obviously they're backed all the fabs. I managed to back none of the favourites and also back not a single horse that placed. So that was also exciting. Great week all around. But let's review the week's racing, and we're going to go through chronologically in a second. But just kicking off, who is your star performer of the week? Who would you give the gold star to?
Yeah, I mean, this is like completely straightforward. I thought Constitution Hill was absolutely sensational. At the Odds Checker preview night in London on the Monday? It's hard to remember now. It seems a long time ago, even though it's only 2 days ago. I met a couple of characters who are now in a WhatsApp group with me, and I had a bet that Constitution Hill, I had the spread at about 4 links, maybe 3.5. I was like, surely he can't absolutely demolish State Man, who's like beaten Honeysuckle by 4 or 5 links, and has beaten everything around him easily since, he's gotten going, and he did. And I guess the mad thing was, like George, he was value for probably at least half a dozen lengths more. I'm not sure how much he could have won by. Genuinely was, and to see Stateman look like kind of almost like a 0 to 95 horse trying to chase him up the Cheltenham Hill was quite remarkable. It was an amazing performance. I've never seen anything like it, and I honestly think it's one of the most, I suppose, challenging debates now. If you're involved in jumps racing, if you own this horse, if you train this horse, if you rode this horse, where do we go next?
Yeah, we heard Ed talking about it there, and unsurprisingly, he wants Constitution Hill to continue running in the Unibet Champion Hurdle. I wonder why. He made that pretty obvious why. But I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll hopefully see Constitution Hill at least once more over hurdles in the coming weeks, possibly twice if they do go over to Ireland as well. But where do you sit now? We've got. What Ed said there, the prices for the champion 5 to 6 for the Unibet Champion Hurdle, 7 to 2 for the Arkle, 10 to 1 for the Champion Chase, 20 to 1 for the Gold Cup. As a racing fan, if you were Michael Buckley, where would you be telling Nicky you wanted to go next year?
So I'm just looking at the prices that Frankel was sent off in his final year, which was obviously his third year: 2 to 7, 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 10, 2 to 11, and I think, if Constitution Hill stays over hurdles, that's like more or less where you'll be. I think that it's almost not so much if he went over fences. I don't think it'd be a problem at all. Like I spoke to Warren Ewing before Cheltenham, and he was actually beaten in his point to point, but he said he jumps really well. He just made a mistake at the last year. He was quite green. And if he went over fences, you obviously have the quandary of, do I go like novice chasing all of next season, or do I waste the season doing that and then go for the champion chase the following season, or do we go for the Gold Cup? And that, like, Michael Buckley's 77 years of age, and at this stage of his life, he's probably like, I could own a Dawn Run here, and to go down in history books would be amazing. But I just do worry about his stamina for that trip, because he's so quick. Like, he's an amazingly good hurdler, but he also has like an amazing natural speed. His turn of foot is, I don't know, I've never seen anything like before. I think like Hurricane Fly is probably up there with him in terms of like his ratings, but I'd say he's nowhere near his hurdling ability. I honestly don't think Hurricane Fly will get near this horse. Is he going to translate that to 22 fences and 3 miles 2 in a chase? I don't know. So I think it'll be, on the one level, it'd be quite dull if he stayed hurdling, and it'd be like procession after procession after procession, presuming he stays well. But if he went over fences, for me, it's like, what distance do you want to go with this horse, and when do you want to put him into senior company? And I did have the kind of it was like a quandary during Cheltenham. If Constitution Hill showed up for the champion chase the day after he won the champion hurdle, what price would he have gone off? And he would have been favourite in my view, because he's that good. And even though he probably hasn't schooled for like 2 years, he's ridiculously good. And I don't know, it's a tough one for Michael Buckley, but I guess it's a nice situation to be in.
Is that, I mean, obviously we're going to see him hopefully see him in the entry hurdle over 2.5, which will be, I don't think there's any doubts about his ability to stay over 2.5 furlongs at entry, 2.5 miles at entry. But, could you sounds a bit disrespectful, could you treat the champion chase as almost like a rather, you mentioned wasting a year in novice chases. Could you go over 2 miles in the champion chase, have that first year over fences, and then look to go forward to the Gold Cup? Or do you think it's a case of choosing between either going 2 miles or the extended trip long term?
The injury thing is fascinating, because, like, I mean, he's going to go off probably about 10s on. There's no question that he's not going to. No question that he's going to have an issue over 2.5 miles, particularly because he's so superior to everything. But as you say, the next season, you're like, well, what are we trying to make this horse into? And like, say he's like 10 to 1 for the juicing or whatever next year. Like that's probably a tempting enough price, because like you're betting 10 to 1 on him basically showing up in the race, and it's like, well, if he's going to Gold Cup, like, longer term, say the season after, and if he's already stayed 2.5 miles as a hurdler, do we want to like bottom him out in the RSA chase? But if we see him as a Gold Cup horse, we probably won't want him in the Arkle. And if Michael Buckley says, okay, he's going to be our Gold Cup horse for 2025, what race is he running next year? And I just find it absolutely fascinating. And if he wins by 10, 15 lengths at Aintree, Michael Buckley's like, well, he only has to go another half a mile in the King George. If we do that this season or the season after, and if he wins the King George, then you're like, well, he's going to stay a Gold Cup trip. But I don't know, like for a horse of the speed that he has and the natural ability, and just like when he gets one squeeze, he just picks up like nothing I've ever really seen before. I'd prefer him to stay unbeaten if I were his owner than tackle the Gold Cup trip for me, because the best chase in racing is not the Gold Cup, it's the Champion Chase, like in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be interesting to see what happens. As Ed said, also priced up Unibet for the Ascot Gold Cup at 16-1 as well. Who was the biggest disappointment for you? The one that you were hoping for big things? I'm guessing maybe Jerry Colomb after what you said at the top.
He actually wasn't, to be honest, George. He was I don't think he was unlucky per se. I think the real whacker actually jumped better than he did. To be honest, the real disappointment for me was Walking the Park, the stallion himself. Like, if you look at, like, he had John Bon and Facile Vega on day one. Walking the Park is a 25 grand stallion. Like, that is incredible money for a national stallion. He's a son of Monju, and a lot of his horses do seem to have quirks. And I just thought that after for me, Facile Vega found next to nothing when he looked like he was going to win the race. John Bon was kind of like he was really put in his place. And for me, Walking the Park as a stallion, I think at this stage he's overhyped. He had Duvan and Min, John Bon's brother, obviously Duvan, and he's had really good horses. But if you look at the amount of horses that JP McManus has sent to Walking the Park, really, really good race mares, and what they produced, and the money that's been spent on them alone, and then you look at him going like through the festival with a blank, considering all the money that's invested in him. It's probably a bit of a convoluted answer, but for me, Walking the Park was the disappointment of the festival.
Interesting. Let's go to Tuesday, and we'll go through kind of chronologically now. Marine Nationale got the week off to a flyer. Barry Connell justified in his bullishness before the race. Really impressive there. And now, assuming that we'll see Marine Nationale going for the Unibet Champion Hurdle next year, 10-1 is the price now.
Okay, so the Supreme Champion Hurdle double has obviously a terrible record. This year Constitution Hill did it, but I cannot for the life of me see any race that this horse runs in next year apart from the Champion Hurdle. And maybe they'll be slightly swayed by what Constitution Hill does, but Marine Nationale for him was really, really good. You have to appreciate how lightly raced this horse was coming into this. He had 2 runs over hurdles, one in the Royal Bond where he made a bad mistake the last and probably wasn't running on his ground. And for one thing, I thought Michael O'Sullivan, for a jockey of his inexperience, rode an unbelievable race. But this horse, in fairness, did have a serious turn of foot on the day, and I thought he absolutely battered Facile Vega. And as much as I was kind of promoting Facile Vega's performance, he still is, like Willie Mullins would say, he's one of the best horses he's ever trained, and he beat him really well. And I thought it was an amazing performance for a horse that had to defy the stats in terms of coming off the break that he did, and also his inexperience. And for me, he's going to run the Champion Hurdle next year.
Looks that way. Al Fabiolo was mightily impressive in seeing off John Bon in the Arkle. I guess because there are maybe some glitzier winners on the Tuesday, Constitution Hill and Honeysuckle. Maybe this has been lost a little bit, but in my book, certainly one of the more impressive Arkle winners in recent years.
And he beat Son Ra by 12 lengths, and Son Ra was a very, very good hurdler who I thought was given a nice ride by Mark Walsh on the day. He was nursed into contention. He was given a ride to kind of pick up the pieces if they fell apart up front. I mean, for me, one of the highlights of the week was Dicer Dynamo getting up on his feet. Because he had given a bold show, but he didn't go a crazy gallop. It was a good, generous gallop. But I thought this horse, I mean, he was kind of unheralded going into Aintree last year when he more or less dead-heated with John Bon, and he's developed into a serious chaser. And again, if you're looking for the Champion Chase next year, everything kind of depends on what Constitution Hill does. But I can't see this horse going anything other than 2 miles for the time being. He's really, really good. Yeah,
he looks like a serious prospect. Just trying to get a price up now. We've got. Where is he? Oh yeah, Al Fabiolo 3-1. Currently just a touch bigger than Anogamine, who's 11-4 for next year's Champion Chase. There were a couple of lovely stories on the day as well. Corach Rambler, of course, coming back and doing it again for Lucinda Russell with another amazing performance and repeating the trick from last year despite being £7 higher. But then, of course, Honeysuckle bowing out, retaining or regaining her mare's crown for Henry Bromhead and Rachel Blackmore in what must have been an incredibly emotional week for the trainer.
Yeah, because like the ultimate to me was one of the the most like visually kind of impressive races of the festival. Just like the ride that Corey Grambler got, like Derek Fox to go up the inner and take all the look that he needed, and I tipped up fast or slow here, anti-post, and I thought he did everything right in the race, and it was just the one horse you didn't want him chasing down was Corey Grambler. I thought that was an amazing training performance. Constitution Hill then for me was the best jumps performance I've ever seen. I honestly do mean that, to do what he did, particularly considering he probably could have won by another half a dozen lengths. And then the honeysuckle thing, and all this was happening in the space of like an hour and a half. The honeysuckle performance was like, it did genuinely remind me, George, of Dawn Run, that the mare is beginning to get up. And like when she's done this in the past where she kind of like misses the last, and she wasn't great at the last, and Love Envoy probably went maybe 3 parts of a length up, and I honestly think Honeysuckle responded to the crowd when they started to roar her home, and it was an amazing day. That hour and a half, when you consider the performance of Marine Nationale, Barry Collins, first runner in Britain, being a winner at the Cheltenham Festival, and then you had you nearly forget that the amateur race at the end was like a pretty crazy race in itself. And I was in a kind of a situation where I'd essentially had John McConnell's horse Malheur Mission. All he had to do was place for me to get over the next line in a kind of a competition I was in, and he obviously fell at the second last, and there's a lot of question marks over what would have happened then. But I think Cheltenham summed up that evening when I spoke to John McConnell. I was like, what are you going to do with Malheur Mission? He said, I'm going to probably run him in the Irish National, or certainly he's entered for it. And I said, obviously that would mean more to you than like winning a fairly ordinary Cheltenham race, in the sense of like it's one of the lesser races of the week. The Irish National is in his own county Meath, 500 grand race. And he said, absolutely, I would have loved to. Cheltenham means everything to me. That would mean more to me than an Irish National. And he obviously did have his Cheltenham winner then as the week progressed.
Absolutely. But where do you think we'll see Gaillard de Mesnil now? We've seen the last 2 winners of this race go to the Gold Cup in Galvin and Statler, and neither perform as to how we probably expected them to. Do you think Gaillard de Mesnil will be kind of directed that way next season?
Yeah, I think he probably will. He's 10-1 for the Irish National, which is interesting because he obviously ran a very good race in it last year, and then 14-1 for the the National itself. Which, I mean, with the prize money and offer, it's got to be a major lure for them. But I to be honest, I thought on that performance he's gonna struggle to win a National. He was absolutely off his feet coming to the 3rd and 4th last, and like maybe he would have won, but I think he did have a bit of luck on his side. And for me, the way he travelled in the race, I couldn't really have him as a National winner.
On to Wednesday's racing now. We mentioned how impressive Marine Nationale was, but Impaire et Passe, despite a kind of bizarre drift in the morning and up to post time, where I think we saw Hermes Allen go off 9-4 favourite, ahead of Impaire et Passe at 5-2. But there was nothing in the drift. They didn't know this time, and another horse who, where do we anticipate having run over 2.5 here? Do you think this is properly going to be a case of let's just swerve wherever Nicky sends Constitution Hill and do the opposite? Yeah,
probably. And like it was actually this is a 2-5 race that was like it was a genuine test. And for me, I was thinking after race when Willie obviously had the first 3 home, so you're thinking, well, okay, if you were that dominant in the Ballymore, could Impaire et Passe have won the champion or the Supreme? And absolutely, I think he might have. He obviously went back to the Moscow Flyer distance at Punchestown, and he looked very, very good. And he's never really come off the bridle. Like maybe he came off the bridle here, but he ended up winning by 6.5 lengths. And the drift was bizarre. I thought it was probably one of the worst bets of the week was Hermes Allen back to nearly even money in running, when I was like, he's doing everything fine here, but all of the horses in behind were still traveling. It was like, how can you back a horse at like 2.2 in running that you know nothing about relative to what he's facing here? And as much as he was disappointing, I thought he shaped quite well. But Impaire et Passe is a phenomenal performance, really. Like Gaelic Warrior was so well touted, and he travelled well.
Jumped straight as well.
Yeah, jumped straight, and like he looks like he's kind of developing with experience. And for me, I'd have no issue going back to 2 miles in Impaire et Passe. We've seen it done before with really, really good champion hurdle winners, the likes of Hardy Eustace, and for me, this horse has no issue with pace whatsoever. And I think, as you say, George, it'll be what Constitution Hill does, and I think a lot of people will be texting Nicky Henderson possibly late at night for his plans.
The Real Wacker was a good result for the Brits, even though it was an Irishman who's moved this side of the Irish Sea, in terms of touching off Jerry Colombe. A difficult one for, well, I mean, I now, having remembered the race, know why you couldn't really say Jerry Colombe was your biggest disappointment, because it was unbelievably tight at the finish.
It was, and I honestly, if you look after the line, like I'm not really sure Jerry Clom was actually getting up, and I think the real whacker was exceptionally game,
Yeah.
and he was. I thought this was a great story, to be honest, that you had a trainer who was basically struggling in Ireland and went over to Britain, and was quite like, I guess, a nod to the past where Irish people went to Britain to get work, and this is exactly what Patrick Devil did. And I thought this was a real old-fashioned staying jumping performance. He just probably jumped a bit better than Jerry Clom. And like when I backed Jerry Clom, I was looking as he's coming to the last. I'm like, okay, I have a chance here, but I probably need the real whacker to miss it or half miss it, and he didn't. He was really, really good, and he was very genuine up the hill. And I don't know. I think Jerry Clom, he was pretty much off the bridle from about half a mile out. He was really, really put to the pin of his collar, and he did stay on well. But I thought there were no real excuses. Like I thought the best horse actually won on the day, and it was a great story for Patrick Neville, who obviously came over from Limerick to I guess make a living as opposed to train a Cheltenham winner, which you probably didn't think of. But this horse will genuinely be a Gold Cup contender next year.
Yeah, it looks that way. In Langadan, after that disappointing, having been so well backed last year in the Martin Pipe, put that right and won the Coral Cup, just touching off an epic song, who, typical to my week, was my bet in the race. But Energumene did it in some style. I mean, I don't know what you felt about this. In some ways, it was one of the most scintillating performances of the week. But in others, I kind of thought to myself, because the horses up against him in terms of Edmondstone and Editor just didn't run to form at all. This was as much of a procession as it could really be in terms of the quality and the standard that the horses in behind ran to.
So I put up Blue Lord for this race, anti-post, and I was gutted that he didn't run it. I was like, this is completely his race. He's not a 2.5 mile horse at all, not to mind a Ryanair horse. And if he'd run in this, maybe you'd have gotten some idea of what Energumene achieved, because with Edward Stone running as badly as he did, for me, this was like Captain Guinness. If Captain Guinness turned up at Naas on a Sunday, it wouldn't get many people to actually go to the meeting. He's a good horse. He's rated 159, but he's nothing outstanding. And he finished second, 24 lengths clear of third in this race. I don't know. Like for me, it was a strange one. I backed Energumene on the day because I just thought that if the vibes were strong for him, I thought he'd be ridden more positively than he was in February, and he was good. He jumped well. You could call him the winner a long way out, but for me, like, what did he beat? And obviously, if Shishkin had actually rocked up in this race, what price would he have been? I'd say he probably would have been favourite, even though he was dropped back to 2 miles. And I don't know, with Edward Stone's performance, Edgar de Geet beating 35 lengths. I don't know. I'd have provisos over it.
Yeah, I agree. Delta Work beat Galvin in the cross country, and Mascada was the winner in the Grand Annual. But in the Champion Bumper, what do we make of a dream to share here? I mean, as you know, you, myself, and Andy are on a WhatsApp group together, and Andy sent over his speed figures for this race, and I did a bit of digging, and there was a horse towards the top end called Lecky Watson, and I went back and watched a couple of Lecky's. It was kind of Willie Mullins' 9th string, I think, in the race.
You probably
watched a couple of.
Did you?
Was a maiden. Yeah, I did. And so I got the payout. But Jesus Christ, go back and watch it, because I wasn't quite counting my winnings at 80-1, but it was absolutely, because basically had raced keen in his last 2 performances, where he was beaten twice, and just thought basically with the stamina, the increased test of stamina, and if he settled, he could run a decent race, and it was squeezed out late on. And it's not often on this show I'll tip something up, but I think the 25-1 about him for the Ballymore next year could be quite interesting given that performance. I'd encourage anyone to go back and watch it back. I'm not saying he'd have won, but certainly some promise there. But a dream to share. Justified some market support and beat Factor File in a decent race.
Yeah, I thought this was a race that was possibly somewhat dictated by the ground, and I was like totally against a dream to share on the basis that I didn't think he'd have his ground. He's kind of a flatbred horse, and the turn of foot that he showed at Leopardstown was quite something. And you mentioned the Lecky Watson. So Lecky Watson is owned by the Slaneyville Syndicate, who obviously would have had Total Recall back in the day. And to the best of my knowledge, they had In Excess, was a really, really promising horse. And he suffered a fatal injury, I believe, on the gallops just before Cheltenham. So they had a really promising horse coming to Cheltenham, who obviously suffered such a setback. And I think in Lecky Watson, they have a horse that definitely going forward could be very good, because he's really only learning to race. And you look at his pedigree as well. He's a right national hunt pedigree on the dam side, and as he learns to race and as he jumps a hurdle, he's going to be very good. But for me, a dream to share. I thought this was a really good performance, because I was the ground was genuinely soft ground by the last race of day 2, and for him to, I know his rider kind of looked for the best of the ground, but for him to confirm his Leopardstown beating over Factor File, I think on better ground he would have beaten him more comfortably. And going forward, for me, he's going to be an absolute out and out supreme novice hurdle horse next season. He, as I mentioned, he's a flat pedigree. I'm really excited by him jumping a hurdle, because he's so much pace. And John Kiley to have his first Cheltenham winner at the age of 85, this was phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, absolutely superb. On to Thursday. This is where the bookies were licking their wounds, and then suddenly it all turned with, I think, Mighty Potter being turned over at 4-6 was the moment I think the festival turned for both bookmakers and punters.
Yeah, and I guess there's an element of hindsight here, but I suppose the one thing that you had to allow for Mighty Potter, in the sense of if you wanted to back the odds on, was the fact that he had disappointed at Cheltenham last year. And I don't know what happened here. For me, if you look at him up the hill, George, he drifted so badly under pressure. And I know, if you look back on the week, and you will say that it wasn't Davy Russell's finest Cheltenham, and he was involved in a lot of kind of horses that ran well but were beaten. This had very little to do with Davy Russell. He basically had his whip in the right hand, and the horse veered badly off the track. And I actually like the fact that Paul Nicholson had a good winner here, because I think we need, jumps racing needs the big British trainers to be winning good races at Cheltenham. I thought Stage Star was very, very good. As much as Mighty Potter, for virtually all the races, this horse is definitely going to win. He was doing everything right, and even the second last, suddenly something went completely awry. And there's a bit of a proviso over him now going forward, because can you not just travel, or is it the fact that you just you can't take the heat of the battle at Cheltenham? But for me, Stage Star was very, very good on the day.
Yeah, really good. And it was a big one for Paul Nichols. You have to feel he's had some difficult times at Cheltenham Festival over the last few years. In the Ryanair, if Shishkin doesn't blow the was it the second last, do you think he gets up and beats Envoy Allen?
Yeah, it was the third last, actually. And again, this was a strange race to call it running, because Shishkin's a strange horse. You're like, well, in 1 minute you're thinking he's a certain winner here, and next you're like, is he traveling? And I thought it was quite compelling what Nico de Bonville said afterwards. He was like, I was never that happy with the horse. And if you marry that to his Cheltenham performance last year, you're like, well, you turned up at Cheltenham as an odds-on shot last year. You turned up as an even favourite this year, and you were pretty comfortably beaten this year, flopped last year. So I'm finding you a little bit hard to trust nowadays, in the sense of he probably does want to go out and trip, and the King George would be interesting. But as much as he made a mistake at the third last, was it enough to beat him? I'm not sure he would have beaten Envoy Allen. I think to give Henry de Bromhead his dues, this is a good training performance. This horse is not straightforward. He'd absolutely bombed in the King George. He'd been a bit of a great white hope that had kind of become a bit of a disappointment. And I thought the way he travelled in the race, it was actually a really, really good performance. Hitman, I thought, ran really well, and French Dynamite actually stayed on quite nicely after coming under pressure 2 out. I thought the form was really, really solid, but Shishin's going to step up and trip. But for me, he's 9 now, going on 10, obviously, when he runs the King George. I couldn't have that much faith in him, in the sense of at least back him at a short price, because if essentially Nico de Bonville was saying this was not the Shishkin that I know well at home, so he didn't perform again at Cheltenham. So I think it's an interesting quantity for Nicky Henderson, but for me, I thought the moral winner won the race. And
in the stayers, thoughts go out to Andy Holding, who was all over Sides Burley for the stayers last year, and goes and wins here at 33-1 in probably one of the biggest upsets in terms of the top two. Side of Burley 33-1, Dashel Drasher 40-1. All credit to anyone who landed the forecast in this one. Yeah, and obviously Tiupu then was promoted to second afterwards, so it was a mad race. An 11-year-old beating a 10-year-old. Sorry, to Burley, my brother asked me to back him before the race. There was obviously somebody who fancied him, and he never backs horses. I didn't see the message until after the race. Oh no. Yeah, so that wasn't very nice for him, although he deals well with adversity. But for me, the performance of the race was home by the lead. Honestly, when that horse made the mistake that he did, and Andy liked him in the race, I really, really liked him in the race. He was desperately weak in the market, and the vibes were not good about him. The mistake that he made was at the
6th. Like, I honestly thought JJ Slevin was going to pull the horse up, and the way he stayed on up the hill to be beaten, say, give or take 3 lengths, I thought it was a phenomenal performance. As much as he'd be a 9-year-old next year, I'd be certainly interested in going back for this race. I think at this stage of his life, they're not going to go chasing with him. I honestly thought he was so genuine to keep going the way that he did, and the mistake 100% cost him more than he was beaten. And for me, he was the horse to take out the race. Tiopo, I thought, did really, really well. You know, he's only a 6-year-old, quite inexperienced, and it'll be interesting to see where they go with him. But essentially, sorry to barely ran here because they didn't get him into the race that they wanted. And sometimes it works out. It was like a relatively quiet week for Gordon Ellie, but this was a good one for him.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll whiz through the last into Friday. We saw Seddon win the plate. You wear it well with a. I think we'll touch on this now with Lashir, I guess, because this used to be a race where, favourite backers could just lump on the Willie Mullins good thing at the top of the market and be happy. But it's pretty quickly developing into one where short price favourites are turned over. Lashir being the latest in that, but a huge winner for Jamie Snowden in You Wear It Well. Yeah,
Lucia's market strength was quite surprising for me because, again, it's like, well, how can you really support this horse taking on the Irish novices? But I actually think she emerged with a lot of credit. She travelled like a really, really good horse. I wouldn't mind going back on the flat with her. And, my girlfriend's called Zoe, so I was telling her to back Princess Zoe. And I was thinking, well, obviously Magical Zoe's going to win now. And I thought Princess Zoe actually emerged with great credit, with a lot of Ferrari over the ride. I don't think the owner covered himself in glory at all on Twitter in recent days. I just thought that she looked like she wanted further, to be honest. I think stepping up a trip be interesting for her. But You Wear It Well, it was a really, really genuine game performance. And as much as I've said several times, George, I'm not massively into these mirrors races. I thought this was a really compelling renewal of the race. And Lucia going forward is going to be interesting. Is she going to rock up maybe in the champion hurdle next year? I don't think she wants 2.5 miles. She's by the Gurkha. And I thought the way she travelled in the race, she's plenty of ability. This was a big step up in class and competitiveness as to what she'd been doing. And if I were Nicky Henderson, I'd be looking to go on the flat with her. But it was a really good renewal of the race. Obviously, Henry de Brom had wanted to win it. He threw, I think he had 5 in the race, and Magical Zoe emerged with great credit. But really good performance by the winner.
Yeah, very good indeed. Angels Dawn with the winner of the Kim Muir in the final race of the day. On to Friday now, and Lossiemouth was mightily impressive, given how freely she ran in the Triumph, and a performance. This is one where the market got it right. Blood Destiny, a huge drifter in the hour or so before the race, and looking kind of miles off the market rival.
Yeah, like you say, Lossiemouth was keen, and she was. But again, if you have a horse that's keen in the Triumph, you want it to be a national hunt-bred horse, not a flatbred horse. If it's a flatbred horse that's keen in the Triumph, it's not going to get home. And Lossiemouth, like Gallimar, is essentially a national hunt-bred horse. And I think the Triumph has changed in recent years, where Willie Mullins didn't necessarily have a great record in it going back. They're now sourcing horses from France that they get who've run in France as 3-year-olds and are essentially quite developed in terms of national hunt horses. And Lossiemouth, for me, I did fancy her in the race, and for all that I wasn't entirely sure, because Andy Holding was all over Blood Destiny. I'm not sure what you can put his performance down to. As you mentioned, the market weakness was very off-putting before the race, but even so, he ran so poorly. I think going forward he'll be fine, but I thought it was a very weak performance. But Gallimar, I spoke to Danny Mullins at the race the other day. He was very taken by her performance, as well as much she was put in her place by Lossiemouth. And it'll be interesting now if Lossiemouth were to go chasing next season, which wouldn't be an issue at all. She'd be a 4-year-old. She'd be getting the allowances. She'd be getting the fillies allowances, and again, what is Constitution Hill going to do? Because I don't want to rock up in the champion hurdle I've no chance in.
Favois won the county hurdle, and then we better talk about the Albert Bartlett quickly, because I think we need to talk about where Corbett's Cross will go and about the winner, Stay Away Faye.
Yeah, I think I don't think Corbett's Cross would have won, to be honest. I think Stay Away Faye might have possibly outstayed him. I know he was an 18-1 shot, but this is kind of going back to like the way that Cheltenham was. If you have Stay Away Faye, who's a horse by Shantou, nice pedigree, who had good form going into Cheltenham. If this were the old days, I don't think you'd have a Paul Nicholls horse as lightly raced as that gone off 18-1, but that's just how it is now. And I thought there was no fluke about this. I think Cheltenham probably erred in the sense that you had that gap between the rail and the hurdle. As much as Corbett's Cross, I'd have no issue with him going forward in terms of his resolution and all that. I thought that it just gave him a kind of a split decision, where sometimes you're in life, you make a split decision. I'm a cyclist, and sometimes you're coming around the bend, you're like, okay, what do I do here? And you just make a call on instinct. And I just think Corbett's Cross, he just, for whatever reason, he'd come under pressure. And I think what was interesting as well was the fact that he was stepping up from 2 miles. And he's the gap between the run at Naas and Cheltenham was so short that it probably didn't actually serve him that well, because he was a little bit keen in the race. But going forward, Paul Byrne bought him for the National next year. He was obviously sold to JP McManus. It'll be interesting to see where they go, but I think they won't drop him back to 2 miles again. I think they'll train him as a stayer with speed, and I thought he emerged with great credit. But for me, the winner was going to win anyway.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I always think of Cheltenham more than any others. Guessing who's going to win up the hills. You don't really know. Often jumping the last, the winner, you can't even see them in the picture. So, you're never quite sure what's going to happen. But I'm still going to be licking my wounds until next year. Onto the Gold Cup now. And, what Ruby Walsh said, it was or was it AP McCoy said it was the best national hunt ride he'd ever seen on Galopin des Champs by Paul Townend. And an impressive winner, and unsurprisingly, the 11-8 favourite for next year's Gold Cup in Galopin des Champs.
Yeah, like they jumped 22 fences here. Like that's an extreme test. And for Paul Townend to ride the horse the way he did, it requires luck. I mean, I laid Galopin des Champs the race on the basis that I thought he was too short, and if Aplutard bounced back to form, Aplutard obviously didn't finish the race. Kind of hard to know what conclusions to draw from that. Henry de Bromhead says he was back. It's hard to know. He seemed to be travelling fine, but I don't think he was a short price, and he was all but brought down by a high senior. The one thing that interested me in the race was that how tired Braveman's game was off the last. Like, he was legless. He was really, really tired. And Andy Holding will tell you what the speed figures were, but he was really, really tired. Conflated and Noble Yates were third and fourth, were essentially staying types, both by Yates, who I thought ran their races, but were no match for Galopin des Champs. I thought Paul Townend, he rode the horse like he was the best horse in the race, but he also rode him thinking there's going to be a strong gallop on here, and almost with a slight proviso over his stamina. He rode him for speed, which Willie Mullen said, you're on the fastest horse in the race. He needed a bit of luck, but it was a hell of a performance. And come back next year, it is kind of hard to oppose him in the sense that he will need luck in running, but on that performance, it's hard to see what of the novices emerges to beat him next year. And I presume Constitution Hill does not go in the Gold Cup next year.
Yeah, for the last 3 races of the week, we saw a lovely story with Bradley Gibbs winning the riding and training the winner in Premier Magic in the Fox Hunters and in the Hunter Chase. And then it was all green and gold for the last 2 races. Impervious with a cracking head-to-head with Allegri Devassi just coming out on top. And then Iroko absolutely motoring up the hill late on to land the spoils for punters there too.
Yeah, and a great win for Aidan Kelly, that. And Iroko was kind of like the old-fashioned JP McManus gamble. It was a very, very interesting market move. He was really well backed all day. You had to take notice of it. A 5-year-old who's only had 6 runs over hurdles. I thought he was really, really good. You imagine what's the ceiling of his ability, given how lightly raced he is. And this race has produced, really, really good horses. I think Galopin des Champs won this, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
And, he was... Galopin des Champs was coming in as a 7 or 8 to 1 shot. It was 100 to 1 this previous race, which is hard to believe. But this is a really good performance. If again, like, where are they going to go with this horse? Because next season, if you want to go down the champion hurdle route with this horse, it's eminently feasible. But you don't want to take on Constitution Hill. Impervious, Andy Holding was all over this. I added somebody to our WhatsApp group for Cheltenham. He said, "You've saved my Cheltenham." I'm like, well, if you're saved by a 15 to 8 shot in the second last of 28 races, you must have had a pretty good bet here. But her turn of foot was quite staggering.
It was my first winner since, I think, the Real Whacker, and it felt like my Cheltenham been safe as well. So.
Yeah, we'll be back next year. But this is a really good turn of foot, because like Allegri Devassi, to me, looked between the second last to last, like she was going to win. This goes exactly back to Dino Blue at Cork, who went, I think, 1 to 10 in running, and she was totally beaten by Impervious's pace. And I think I was looking at the odds for the race next year. She's not actually a bad price, because it's very, very hard to see her doing anything but this. She was bought by JP McManus, given a Cheltenham winner. JP McManus buys horses to win at Cheltenham, and we saw that with the likes of Corbett's Cross. He won the last 2 races on day 4, and you can imagine the smile on his face, because he wanted Cheltenham winners. And for me, she can only go to that race next year. Maybe Willie will come up with something, but for me, she'll beat Allegri Devassi every day of the week in that performance. I was delighted for Brian Hayes, and the turn of foot she showed up the hill was quite staggering. She just loves jumping fences.
Yeah, it was a brilliant performance and a great way to end the festival with both of those winners doing it in stunning fashion. There we go. That is our review of the Cheltenham Festival 2023. Thank you very much to Johnny for taking the time to talk us through his thoughts. We're going to be back looking ahead, I think, next week. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled for the Oddschecker betting show. You can find it up on the Oddschecker YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe there and any podcast platform as well. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Unibet, for sponsoring the Oddschecker betting show. And if you go and look down in the description of this video or podcast, you can find the new customer offer. Deposit £10 and get money back up to £40 if your first racing bet loses, plus a £10 casino bonus. T's and C's do apply. Cheers, Johnny. Speak soon.
Thank you, sir.